As a Marine, I used to have the graveyard patrol shift at the Beirut bombing memorial. Part of the memorial is dedicated to a veterans cemetery. Oddly enough, I never got freaked out being completely alone in a remote cemetery, in the middle of the night, surrounded by dense woods on all sides. It was actually kind of peaceful, to be honest. However, one night I was patrolling near the perimeter fence where some of the oldest headstones are, when I heard the sound of a woman humming. I followed the sound and noticed a light glowing through the vines and brush of a large tree. As I approached, I could literally feel my hair beginning to lift as if there was an electric current in the air. I pushed aside the brush and what I saw nearly took my breath away. It was an old, weathered headstone with a large cross etched into the marble. Only the cross was glowing a bright, vivid blue, like a neon bulb. The humming was also suddenly much louder and had a weird plurality to it, like it was coming from hundreds of voices at once. Needless to say, I freaked the fuck out. I screamed like a scared little girl and sprinted back to the parking lot. I radioed the guard who was supposed to relieve me and forced him to come early, then spent the rest of my shift in the cab of his truck. I don't think he believed me, but he stayed in his truck and didn't go out on patrol until the sun was fully up. A few days later, I worked up the nerve to return to the grave. As I suspected, in the light of day it was a completely mundane headstone. There was no name, only the aforementioned cross. I ran my hands over the stone and checked to see if maybe there was some sort of hidden light source or solar panel, but no, it was just plain, solid, unremarkable stone. The humming was gone, too. I eventually returned to my normal shift, but never again experienced anything out of the ordinary. I never learned whose grave that was, either, but I find myself thinking about it from time to time. It certainly sounds absurd when I say it out loud, and I suppose it could have been a hallucination or a trick of my tired brain, but I don't believe it was. I think it was real, a ghost or spirit of some sort, but I don't think it was malevolent at all. I never thought I'd be haunted by my military experiences. As a soldier, I thought I was prepared for anything, the danger, the fear, the uncertainty. But what I encountered in the desolate mountains of Afghanistan was beyond my imagination. It was a routine patrol, or so we thought. My squad and I were walking along a narrow path when suddenly the ground beneath us shook violently. An explosion threw us into the air, and when we landed, we were surrounded by smoke and debris. Screams filled the air, and I realized with horror that my left leg was missing. I tried to move, but the pain was unbearable. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, and saw my teammates lying motionless on the ground. I don't remember much of what happened after that. I was airlifted to a hospital and underwent several surgeries. I was lucky to be alive, they said. But the physical wounds were nothing compared to the mental scars that lingered long after I left the military. Every night, I relived that moment, the explosion, the screams, the feeling of helplessness. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. I was diagnosed with PTSD, but no amount of therapy or medication could erase the memories. I tried to move on, to live a normal life, but the nightmares kept coming. I saw myself back in Afghanistan, fighting a losing battle against an invisible enemy. I felt the heat, the dust, the sweat. I smelled the gunpowder, the blood, the death. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat and saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was a man, or what appeared to be a man, but with distorted features and a hollow gaze. I screamed, but he didn't move. He just stared at me, silently accusing me of something I couldn't comprehend. I thought it was a hallucination, a side effect of my medication. But the next night, and the night after that, he was there again. And he was getting closer. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that I was just imagining things. But the fear was too real, too palpable. I knew I had to do something, to confront my demons once and for all. I went back to Afghanistan, this time as a civilian. I visited the site of the explosion, now a desolate wasteland. I walked along the path where we were ambushed, feeling the same sense of unease and vulnerability. And then I saw him again. The figure, standing a few feet away, looking at me with cold eyes. But this time, I didn't run. I didn't scream. I faced him head-on, ready to fight if I had to. And then he vanished, like a wisp of smoke in the wind. It was then that I realized, the figure wasn't a ghost, or a figment of my imagination. It was my own fear, my own guilt, my own trauma. I had been running from it all this time, trying to escape the memories that haunted me. But the only way to conquer it was to confront it, to acknowledge it, to accept it. I left Afghanistan a different person. The nightmares didn't go away, but they didn't control me anymore. I was no longer a victim of my own mind. I was a survivor. I was by myself in the engine room of a submarine on the mid-watch, just a newly reported sailor trying to find equipment so I could display knowledge to one of the watchstanders. There are a number of bays in engine room lower level with narrow passages that pass through the center. I came down one of the ladders, and I swore I saw someone walk across the ship about 15 feet in front of me. I could hear his footsteps as he walked around a corner and out of sight. 3 problems. 1. He was wearing utilities, an older, light blue blouse and dark navy slacks. Nobody had utilities anymore. They had been phased out 3 years earlier. 2. There was only one other person awake in the engine room that late at night, and he was standing at the top of the ladder behind me, waiting for me to come back up with an answer to his question. 3. He wasn't actually there. I wrote it off as sleep deprivation, but I'll admit it shook me for a while. Fast forward to 4 months later, I had gone out to sea with another submarine of the same type. While I was there, I met a sailor who had previously served on my ship. After a few weeks of standing watch with him, he told me a story of a sailor who had committed suicide while on watch when he served on my ship almost a decade earlier. In engine room lower level. In his utilities. I wish I could have gotten a picture of the look on my face. I'm sure it was the definition of disbelief. This is my dad's story. After he was done in Vietnam, he soon stationed at an Air Force base in Greenland. They had bad blizzards often there, and when they came through, the base shut down and every section of the barracks would take roll call. These blizzards are intense. There were cables running between all the buildings you attached to your person with a carabiner, so if there was a sudden whiteout you didn't get lost and die. They had people die literally 20 meters from shelter because they got lost in bad weather and froze. He said for about 5 months every time they locked down for weather they would hear horrendous screaming outside. Everyone was accounted for, so they didn't risk sending anyone out to investigate. They wrote it off as an animal. However, every time this was heard, the engine room would be wrecked. Tools everywhere, paperwork all over the floor, tables and toolboxes knocked over. Even one time a several thousand-pound jet engine had been lifted from its workbench crane thing and smashed almost 30 feet away. The hangars and engine room had cameras covering every single possible entrance with spotlights that made them clear even in a whiteout. No animals, no people, no anything was ever seen entering or leaving those buildings. Then one day it just stopped. Edit okay, since I have a lot of debate on what could have caused this, I will clear some stuff up. This was not something they just shrugged at. It cost a lot of money and threw a wrench in at least one surveillance routine, which caused a lot of brass from the DoD and the CIA to breath fire down the base commander's neck. This facility, beyond military function, served as a base for a lot of civilian research as well. There was a full investigation using all manner of scientists, engineers, and specialists. They came up with no satisfactory explanation for what was happening. I do not believe in the paranormal, nor did my father. This is the only spooky type story he has from 22 years in the service. No one knows what happened. It was very strange in every way. Hundreds of people wrote reports and documented this. It wasn't just some grease monkeys scratching their heads and randomly guessing. That said, I spoke to my mom. She told me a couple things I missed. After one of these occasions, the U-2 in the shop had all its electronics turned on. Many of the systems in this plane were special built for this airframe and this particular cruise mission. These systems were complex and archaic. Very few people knew how to operate this machinery, and the only ones on base that could were 2 engineers and its crew. It wasn't a simple matter of hitting power buttons and flipping switches from off to on. Another time 3 barrels of hydraulic fluid vanished and were never found. They doubted the screaming noise was wind because it came in short, irregular bursts, and winds never produced those sounds again. They theorized it was a polar bear, but, if it was, its coincidental timing was extremely uncanny. Lastly, control picked up a bunch of weird interference and anomalous readings that, again, had the uncanny timing of happening only when this was going on. They were never able to reproduce these errors in a controlled manner. Submariner here. There are few things as unnerving as wondering about the engine room from 23:30 to 05:30 alone on watch. When the boat is largely shut down in port, it becomes a very quiet place. The roving watches usually make it an hourly game to speed through their log rounds, especially in the lower levels. One particular in-port period, the boat was moored in Pearl Harbor and a few people started complaining about a real uneasy feeling. I was on the mid-watch as the SEO on evening and a senior chief came back to do his required 0300 tour. We saw him walk past maneuvering on his way to Shaft Alley. This particular senior chief was the crusty old salt type, and would usually spend a bit of time just sitting in the lower levels of the engine room alone and contemplate life, so we expected as much. What we didn't expect was him to literally run into the maneuvering area a few minutes later. The man was pale-faced, and breathing heavily. We sat up straight, our eyes as wide as his, thinking we were about to have to announce and fight some ship casualty. He slumps into the EDO chair. A few tense, and silent, moments go by. We're on pins and needles. He finally opens his mouth and tells us about the fucking ghost in Shaft Alley. Swears a sailor passes by him as he's sitting on a trash can in Shaft Alley. His first response was to call out to the guy, see who it was. But then he realized this guy isn't dressed right. He describes what this guy was wearing, the old World War II naval uniforms. So he quickly gets up to catch up to the guy, and he does. Catches up to him all the way aft. The guy turns towards the senior chief. Looks right at him. Then turns away and literally walks through ass end of the boat. It's now that the senior chief decides it's time to leave Shaft Alley, and promptly does so. Swears up and down that he knows what he saw. I sure as hell wasn't about to leave maneuvering that night to find out for myself. I never thought I'd end up in the military. I was just a young guy, fresh out of high school with no real direction in life. But then, my friend convinced me to join the army with him. It sounded like an adventure, and I had nothing else going on, so I agreed. Boot camp was tough, but I made it through. I was shipped off to Afghanistan soon after, and that's when things started to get really scary. We were stationed in a small village, tasked with keeping the peace and protecting the locals. But the Taliban had other plans. They attacked us almost every night, and we were always on edge, never knowing when the next assault would come. One night, I was on patrol with a couple of other guys. We heard something moving in the bushes, so we fanned out, guns at the ready. That's when we saw it, a figure, black and shadowy, darting through the trees. We opened fire, but the figure was too quick. It disappeared into the darkness, leaving us shaken and scared. The attacks continued, and we were always on high alert. But that black figure haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. One night, we were attacked again. It was more intense than ever before, with gunfire and explosions ringing out all around us. I did my best to fight back, but I was hit in the arm and went down. I thought I was done for, but then I saw the black figure again. It was moving towards me, a sinister grin on its face. I was terrified, but then something inside me snapped. I got up, grabbed my gun, and charged straight at the figure. It disappeared again, but this time, I wasn't scared anymore. I knew I could take it on. From that moment on, things started to change. The Taliban attacks became less frequent, and when they did come, we were ready for them. We knew how to fight back, and we did it with confidence and courage. When my tour was finally over, I came home a different person. I had seen things that nobody should ever have to see, but I had also faced my fears and emerged victorious. I was proud of what I had accomplished, and I knew that I could face anything life threw at me from that point on. I served in the military for 6 years, and I witnessed some truly horrifying things during my time there. But nothing could have prepared me for the horrors I would face in the barracks on one particular night. It was a typical evening, and I was settling into my bunk for some much-needed rest. I had just returned from a mission and my body was exhausted. As I closed my eyes, I heard a strange noise coming from the far end of the barracks. It sounded like someone was whispering, but the words were unintelligible. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but the whispers grew louder and more persistent. I sat up in bed and looked around the room, but everyone else was fast asleep. The whispers continued, and soon they were accompanied by the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth. I got out of bed, thinking maybe one of my fellow soldiers was having a nightmare or sleepwalking. But as I approached the end of the barracks, the whispers turned into screams. I froze in terror as the shrieks filled the air, echoing off the walls. I looked around for the source of the noise, but there was no one there. The room was empty. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the barracks into darkness. I stumbled back to my bunk, heart racing. That's when I heard it. A raspy voice whispering in my ear, "Get out." I bolted upright, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. I could make out the shape of a figure standing over me, his face twisted in a grotesque expression. I couldn't move, couldn't even scream. I was paralyzed with fear. The figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, and the lights flickered back on. I scrambled out of bed and ran to the door, not daring to look back. As I stumbled out into the hallway, I saw my fellow soldiers emerging from their bunks, looking just as terrified as I felt. We all shared the same experience that night, but none of us could explain what had happened. From that night on, the barracks were haunted. We could hear strange noises and whispers every night, and the air was always thick with an eerie presence. We never could find an explanation for what had happened, but it felt like the spirits of past soldiers were still lingering, unable to rest in peace. Leaving the military was a relief, but the memories of that haunted barracks will stay with me forever. I had been serving in the military for almost a decade when I received the call for one last mission. It was supposed to be an easy one, a routine reconnaissance operation in a remote area. But as soon as we arrived, things started to go wrong. The jungle was dense, and we had to hack our way through it with machetes. My team consisted of 6 people, all experienced soldiers like me. But despite our training, we couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. As we moved deeper into the jungle, we began to see strange things. Shadows darting between trees, fleeting glimpses of figures that disappeared as soon as we looked at them. We all tried to ignore it, but the tension was palpable. Our radios crackled with static, and we started to lose contact with the outside world. We pressed on, our senses on high alert. And then, we stumbled upon the village. It was unlike any we had ever seen. The buildings were made of twigs and mud, and the air was thick with the smoke of burning herbs. The villagers looked at us with expressions of fear and awe. We tried to communicate with them, but they spoke a language we couldn't understand. That's when things started to get really strange. Our equipment started to malfunction, our guns jamming and our night vision goggles failing. We couldn't explain it, but it was like the jungle itself was fighting against us. As night fell, we set up camp in the village. We took turns keeping watch, but none of us could shake the feeling of being watched. And then, in the middle of the night, we heard it. A low, guttural growling that seemed to come from all around us. We scrambled to our feet, our guns at the ready. And then they came. Figures emerged from the jungle, their eyes glowing in the darkness. They were unlike any enemy we had ever faced. They moved with unnatural speed, their limbs twisting and contorting in ways that defied physics. And they were hungry for us. We fought back with all we had, but it was like trying to fight a force of nature. Our bullets went right through them, and they seemed to shrug off our blows. One by one, my team was taken down, until I was the only one left standing. I don't know how I survived. I ran through the jungle, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear them behind me, their growls getting closer and closer. And then, I saw a light in the distance. It was a military helicopter, sent to rescue us. I don't know how they found me, but I was grateful. As we lifted off, I looked down at the jungle, feeling a sense of relief mixed with horror. I don't know what we encountered in that jungle. Maybe it was a new kind of enemy, or maybe it was something supernatural. All I know is that it was the most terrifying experience of my life. And it will haunt me forever. I remember my military experiences like they were yesterday. The sound of gunfire, the smell of cordite, and the screams of fallen comrades all still haunt me. I was a young man then, eager to serve my country and make a difference in the world. But I had no idea what horror awaited me. The first few months were the hardest. Basic training was grueling, but I was determined to be the best. I pushed my body to the limit, and my drill sergeant praised me for it. He said I had a natural instinct for combat, that I was a born warrior. I took it as a compliment, but the truth was, I was just scared. I didn't want to let my team down, to be the weak link in the chain. When we were finally deployed, I felt a mix of excitement and fear. We were headed for a war zone, a place where our enemies would stop at nothing to kill us. We were briefed on our mission, and I remember feeling a knot in my stomach. We were going to raid a terrorist cell and extract their leader. The operation started off smoothly. We moved in under the cover of darkness, our night vision goggles allowing us to see clearly. We took out the first few guards without a problem, but then all hell broke loose. We were ambushed by enemy forces, and we were outnumbered and outgunned. I saw my comrades fall one by one, their blood staining the ground. I could hear the screams of the wounded, begging for help. I don't know how I made it out alive. I crawled through the dirt, dodging bullets and praying for a miracle. I finally reached a safe zone, where I collapsed from exhaustion. I was covered in dirt and blood, and my heart was pounding like a jackhammer. The rest of my time in the military was a blur of missions and battles. I saw things that I wish I could forget, things that still keep me up at night. I lost good friends, men and women who had families and dreams. I wondered if it was worth it, if all the pain and suffering was worth the cause. But then something happened that changed everything. We were on a routine patrol, scanning the area for any signs of enemy activity. That's when we stumbled upon a group of children, huddled together and crying. They were malnourished and scared, and we realized that they had been abandoned by their parents. It was a wake-up call for me. These children were the innocent victims of war, and they deserved a chance at a better life. We took them under our wing, and we started a mission to help the locals in any way we could. We built schools and hospitals, and we taught them how to defend themselves. In the end, I realized that my military experiences had taught me something valuable. It wasn't just about fighting for your country or defending your beliefs. It was about making a difference in the lives of others, no matter how small. My time in the military may have been filled with horror and pain, but it also taught me the true meaning of service. I was a young man fresh out of high school, full of ambition and a desire to serve my country. The military seemed like the perfect way to do just that. So I signed up, willing to do whatever it took to protect and defend my homeland. I was sent to a remote base in the mountains, tasked with guarding the perimeter and keeping watch for any enemy activity. It was a lonely existence, with long hours spent in the cold, dark night. But I was determined to do my duty. One night, I was on my usual patrol when I heard a strange noise, a soft whispering that seemed to come from all around me. It was so eerie, it made my blood run cold. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I swung my rifle up, ready to defend myself, but there was nothing there. Just the shadows and the whispering. I tried to radio in for backup, but my radio was dead. It was just me, alone in the dark, with something, or someone, out there watching me. I continued my patrol, my heart thumping in my chest. Then something touched me, a cold, bony hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but still saw nothing. That's when the whispering grew louder, and I realized it wasn't just in my head. It was coming from a group of figures standing just beyond the perimeter fence. They were ghostly, translucent, dressed in old military uniforms. I couldn't make out their faces, but I knew they were soldiers who had died in battle long ago. I tried to run, but my feet felt like they were stuck in mud. I was frozen in place, unable to move as the ghostly soldiers closed in on me. And then, I woke up. It had all been a nightmare, the product of too many hours spent on guard duty and too much stress. But the memory of that night stayed with me for years, haunting me even after I left the military. I never forgot the eerie feeling of being watched, of being surrounded by something I couldn't explain. And I couldn't help but wonder, was it just my imagination, or was there something truly supernatural out there in those mountains?